sisters, you have to understand, when people don't meet our expectations, we have the propensity to leave them. You were fine with Jesus helping the poor and healing the sick. But when you discovered how his message resonated with people who didn't look like you, who didn't think like you, who didn't act like you, you found yourself troubled with his call to radically transform the world by being somebody who's impacting your community. Most of us, you're okay with Jesus until he upsets the equilibrium in your life. Matter of fact, you don't mind serving Jesus until Jesus comes and calls you out about something. You want to help him, help those who are living on the fringes of society. You want to help Jesus, help single mothers. You want to help Jesus, help those who are living in low incomes, who are being cheated by the government. But when Jesus turns the mirror on you, are you willing to stick with him? Or are you going to be willing to run and betray him with your Judas spirit? You may not be receiving 30 pieces of silver like Judas does, but in some form or fashion, all of us was, is, or we possess the propensity to sell Jesus out for your fleshly desires, particularly when Jesus isn't meeting your expectations. As Matthew begins to record this final week of Jesus' life, we come to this dark scene, which informs us in chapter 26, as to how the chief priests will achieve their goal of arresting Jesus. At the opening of the chapter, the Jewish religious leaders are fearful that if Jesus continues on this road of preaching about the kingdom and healing the sick and proclaiming this good news to the poor, if he continues on a route like this, he will cause the masses to resist the Roman authority, therefore disrupting their political alliance that they've been using to serve their own pockets that day. Jesus, my brothers and sisters, anytime he's a threat to the status quo. And anytime you and I decide that we want to align ourselves with a man like Jesus who's going to feed the sick, who's going to help those who can't help themselves, who's going to be there for children who've been abandoned by their parents, who's going to be there for individuals who've been cast aside on the fringes of society. Anytime that any individual wants to stand with the people who are the least of these, who society continues to ignore, do know you become a threat to everything that exists. Jesus, my brothers and sisters, you must expect that he's coming to redefine the social order of life and impact the spiritual well-being of the masses. But in between this opening scene in chapter 26 and then our text in verse 14, there's a very scene there that's kind of disturbing. An unnamed woman comes and anoints the feet of Jesus. The disciples, seeing her pour this expensive oil all over the feet of Jesus, become disgruntled over the woman's acts, and they are rebuked by Jesus' questions. But notice here in verse 14 that the text shifts very quickly by informing us that one of the 12 has gone to the chief priests. And our familiarity with the story can oftentimes hinder you and I, our ability to really understand and see more than what's really right there. Because you got to understand, it would be good to note that though Judas was just in the presence of Jesus, it doesn't mean he had a personal experience with Jesus. I'm simply suggesting, my brothers and sisters, that all of the clapping, all of the feel-good songs that many of us will experience on today, I don't care how much you read your Bible, until Christ has transformed your life. You can have all the Bible knowledge in the world, but until he has come and radically transformed you, you can be in the presence of Jesus and still miss out on the blessings that Jesus has for you because you're not willing to be open to what Jesus is willing to do for your life. Because many of us, we come before Jesus week after week, only to discover that our lives seemingly are constantly circling around in the wilderness. What I'm most interested in today, though, my brothers and sisters, is the fact that Judas isn't approached by the chief priests. Rather, Judas is the one who's approaching them. I know Mark, Luke, and John have their own version, but this morning I want to rest our attention on what Matthew has to say. Because you have to wonder as to what kind of relationship or social standing does Judas have to where he can easily approach the chief priests. Matter of fact, what is it that will tick any of us off that when we thought we loved Jesus and now a week later we're turning our backs on everything that Jesus has brought into our life and everything that's associated with Jesus? According to the narrative here in Matthew, Judas is motivated by money. More importantly, if we pay close attention to the text in the previous scene Judas just left, we would be careful to note that perhaps after Jesus fails to meet Judas' expectations, Judas allows his loyalty to Christ to be dominated by his love for his wants. Because truth of the matter is, no matter how much you love Jesus, unless you allow the Spirit of God to dominate your will, you'll constantly find yourself tempted to sell Jesus out for all your fleshly desires. I'm simply trying to teach us this morning is this one point. Loyalty to a cause can be dominated by a greater love for a loyalty to your wants. I know you came, you love, you may be committed to the vision right now, you may be sanctified for Christ right now at this moment, but when Jesus fails to align himself with your actions, when Jesus fails to meet all of your wants, my brothers and sisters, you will have the tendency to run to the chief priests in your life and you'll sell out Jesus. Matter of fact, if it's not Jesus, you'll sell out the very people who've been around helping you. When they don't align themselves, when they're not doing what you want them to do, when they're not coming to your side, all of us have the tendency to run out on our best friends and leave them by the wayside. I'm simply saying, some of us, you love your wants more than you really love Jesus. So the question begs to be asked this morning then, how can my personal wants rule out my loyalty and my love for Jesus? Or better yet, the question needs to be asked, what would lead me to be a sellout to Christ? Or better yet, let me put this in here. What possibly would lead you to really be a sellout to some of your friends who are trying to help you be good and do right for Christ? First of all, the text, it teaches us this one quick lesson here. It teaches us that, here it is, closeness to Jesus does not ensure that you have a desire for Jesus. Notice in verse 14 that Matthew is very intentional in his introduction of the scene. Before he begins to identify the person, he is careful to note that one of the 12 is the ones that are approaching him. This is important for us to note because this isn't just anybody approaching these individuals. He's not some disgruntled follower whose child didn't get healed by Jesus during his ministry. This isn't some hopeful follower of Christ who turned away after spending a week only to discover that Jesus didn't have anywhere to lay his head. This is not just another individual who's a part of the elite social class within the temple structure who didn't like Jesus in the first place. No, this individual is one of the 12, verse 14 says. He's been there with Jesus. He's heard every teaching of Jesus. He's seen the great power of Jesus. He's seen the miraculous works that flow from the mouth and the sayings of just Jesus saying one word. He is one of the 12. And this line in verse 14 should alarm each and every one of us today, because you can be one of them and yet not be one with him. I'm simply saying that all of us, even when we leave this room, we can be ones who are counted among the number today, who lifted up our hands, who've been here among Jesus, but yet when you walk out this room, you may not be with Jesus like you thought. You find yourself in many of those predicaments today, that there was folks who were around you while you were on top. They were there with you while long as you had a job, long as you were able to pass out some cash. I don't mind being around you, but when the cash flow stops going, when I find you down and out, when you can't do anything for me, I don't mind being around you, but I can't be one with you. And too oftentimes, my brothers and sisters, we find ourselves in society today. I don't mind being around people who think like I do. I don't mind being around certain people, but as soon as the party stops, I can't with you. And too often times we find ourselves pushing Jesus out of our lives. Jesus ain't healing your mama. He ain't coming to your rescue. He's not paying your bills. Jesus, you was cool then, but when you stopped doing all of that, I was with you then, but now I can't be one with you. So here it is a problem. We too often assume that we have an unfailing love for Jesus because we've been around what he likes. We've helped a few people that he would have loved us to help. Or we ensured that we maintain a regular attendance at a local church. But this text challenges us to see that we can often be in proximity with Jesus, but never fully transformed by his presence in our lives. Judas can't be one with him because, here it is, I want you to understand this. Judas never allowed Jesus to evolve beyond how he met Jesus in the first time. One of the numerous reasons many relationships or friendships fail result from the fact that one person in the relationship, all of us can attest to this, feels that the other person in the relationship has changed. A man may tell his wife that you're different than what you used to be when we were dating. You don't do the same things you used to do anymore. What's going on with you? I don't know what you like. I didn't know you liked that color. I didn't know you liked that kind of food. What happened? When did all this change happen in your life? And the same can be said in any friendship. And the problem is when one individual finds themselves not liking what their significant other has become, they tend to act out inappropriately. The problem is not, my brothers and sisters, that they're not the same person you met. It's just that you never allowed that person in your life to evolve beyond how you met them the first time. I know when you first started dating, she used to like this. I know he used to be like this, but you have to allow room for them to grow into what God is calling them to be. And they only did at the time for you what they were doing. Your friend may not enjoy the same activities as they once did because they've evolved beyond how you met them. Much as we do in our relationships with people, we also encounter that same kind of relationship with Jesus. Because perhaps therein lies a problem with Judas in our text. After watching Jesus allow a woman to perform what is culturally considered an undignified act of anointing his feet, after watching how Jesus has been treating the poor, after watching how Jesus has been associating himself with the tax collectors, Judas found, I may not like this kind of Jesus in my life. He was doing too much that went beyond his expectation of what the Messiah should be. And if we're not careful, you and I, you'll find yourself sitting in the same predicament as Judas. I know when you first came to Jesus, he seemed one way to you and you were ready to leap over fences for Jesus. But when you didn't allow Jesus to evolve, to introduce himself in more and more ways to you, you couldn't handle that kind of Jesus. I know in the beginning, Jesus always said yes, yes, yes. But the more Jesus was growing on you, the more he was willing to open up his life to you, you discovered those yeses sometimes turn into no's. I know it seemed like the windows of heaven were opening up and they were pouring out abundant blessings, but there came a season in your life that the more you grew to know Jesus and the more Jesus was willing to elevate you to another level, he said, there's some stuff about me I have to close up the windows of heaven and let you depend on me solely on my word and not what I'm giving you as the source to how I'm going to propel you to a better future. I'm simply suggesting and trying to help somebody in this house that you got to allow some folks grow in your life. Don't get mad if they start reading their Bible. Don't get mad if they don't want to go to the same places they used to go, because they have to evolve beyond how you met them the first time. Talk to me or somebody.